So thank you very much to the TSA for inviting IBM to come and speak today. There's been a plethora of amazing presenters before me, and I'm very grateful. Karen mentioned IBM Watson a number of times. What I wanted to do was look at how we make it real. We've seen lots of examples today on the predictions, and I've got some similar predictions to you saw from Karen, and what's actually happening in the real world. And part of my job, I get the excitement of looking at new technologies. I'm in a very privileged position of using artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence to actually help us understand the art of the possible. And then the best bit is making it happen. So I wanted to talk to you about some of those predictions that we're going to make for the next 10 years and review how those are actually happening today and what, as a group of people here, from clinicians to innovators and entrepreneurs, we can actually do to make a difference to making this our reality for our consumers. So care systems will proactively manage population health risks. I firmly believe in the sense of collaboration and competition. And if you put those two things together, that's where you find true innovation, because we're always trying to find an edge. But that edge will actually help us with the real big picture problems that we have. Care will be delivered. You've heard a lot about integrated, supportive, multidisciplinary teams. And earlier on, one of our colleagues was talking about carers. And part of our support infrastructure is not only for the clinicians, for the patients, for the consumers, but also thinking about how those carers have access to information. We talk about the challenge of GPs sharing information. We talk about sharing it across platforms, whereas actually a lot of the insights come from the people that are doing the caring. And that might be family, it might be friends, neighbors, extended family. Sharing plans as to what we're going to do and how we're going to do that. And that can be anything from popping in to make sure somebody's okay to actually the planned response in an emergency. You heard the word co-creators earlier. You'll see themes in this, and I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing that there's repetition in what we're doing, because I agree with Karen. I think we're at this tipping point where so much is coalescing, technologies are converging, and it's really going to enable us to take big strides forward. I see that happening. There's small spots. Beverly talked earlier about some of those areas. Being able to co-create our own health. It's quite hard to see in the audience, but I'm going to ask the question, who's got a wearable of some kind on them? Okay, so what's interesting is this is a healthcare audience. And if you do this in a technology audience, so if I do this with IBM, with any of my peer group, industry peer group, it's about the same percentage response. But you've got to be passionate about what you do. You've got to believe in it. I'd encourage you all. I have, and I put a bracelet over mine today because I'm doing a number of things. I'm going straight from here to Heathrow. But be passionate about what you do, and that means being curious and learning about what it does for you, because we each have a personal journey. You'll find your own narrative, both based around the company that you work for, the group that you work for, but also your own personal experiences. So I'd encourage those of you that didn't put your hands up, not that you were shy, but that you don't have one, to go and do that. Go get yourself a wearable and see what difference it makes, because you will find yourself being a co-creator of your own personal health journey. I started doing the 10,000 steps a day. I instantly dropped half a stone. I didn't change anything. I still like champagne. I still like chocolate. I'm vegetarian. My diet would look completely amazing if it wasn't for the champagne and chocolate. But just changing one habit, just changing that one habit, I'm now co-creating and changing my path. My parents both had a history of heart disease, and when my mother's was a surprise to us all, and at 69 had a heart attack, and it made me realize that I needed to do something differently. And that was the beginning of my personal journey with wearables. I'd encourage you to go out and think about how you're going to co-create your own health. We've talked a lot about smart homes. There's some fantastic smart home technology if you haven't been out to the booths already in the demonstration area. We're looking at how you have that telecare and being mostly provided in the home, which again Karen referred to, is that most of our healthcare is actually going to be provided to us on a continuous basis. And going to a health centre will be more for trauma or some other kind of intervention that's needed. But a lot of us want that continuity of care, of knowing something's going to happen before it happens, being able to intervene early. Smart home technology has really come on leaps and bounds, and I think that that's something that's just going to help us age in place. Health data will be liberated. Liberated is a really interesting word. There's a number of people, I really enjoyed the gala dinner last night. I got to enjoy speaking to many different people, and I'm going to a completely different event tonight. And what I'm looking forward to is actually putting those different sets of data together. And the challenge of liberating data, we've talked about standards, we've talked about privacy and security, but the challenge is actually that we've got to realize that knowledge shared is actually power squared for us as a people, for a population. And breaking down the boundaries of feeling that that knowledge is power for yourself, but actually in sharing that, we have greater power to fix things. We have greater powers of prediction, we have greater powers to actually truly get to some of the biggest challenges that exist in healthcare with these isolated pockets. And some people in the audience, some people that are running companies are thinking, you know, it's mine, I've gathered it, it's what I do. But I would encourage you to think about being open. There's an amazing lady called Fran Ashcroft in Oxford, who's one of the most funded research scientists. She actually specializes in diabetes, which we've heard a lot about over the 2 days. And she does this fantastic talk in innovation about how truly the art of innovation is about collaboration. It's about sharing. Alexander Fleming may have found penicillin, but when he realized what it was, he didn't commercialize it. What he did was write up what he'd found, and 2 other guys actually commercialized it. They figured out how to make that into a product that was usable. So he may not have ever been interested enough to do that. He was quite proud of this finding that he had. But it's somebody will take that on and do something amazing with it. Now that's, you know, I work for a company that makes money. And its goal is to be part of a community. We have a social conscience, and collaboration is part of that social conscience. So again, I'd encourage you to think about not only what you have and what you can gain from that, but actually what you can give and what the bigger picture is in giving that. So open standards are really important here, and putting that to work for all of our benefits. I think that there'll be many new services that are created. We have an aging population, not only in the UK, but generically. And what we need to be looking at, again, is that how you support the individual, how you support the carers and the clinicians. So those services will not only be to help the patient or the consumer, but you have to think about health in its broader context. Clinicians spend something like 5 hours looking through data, trying to find research, trying to find relevant information that's going to help them with the next thing they have to do, the next decision they have to make. Imagine the services that could be provided by all of the companies that you've heard spoken about, from the research that's done and the collective knowledge that will actually help them make better decisions. We talk about patient-led decisions and patients like me and giving power to the people, but actually what we also want, as well as that, is that our clinicians are truly expert. And they can't do that alone, and they can't just do it from research papers. So having access to new services that would give them a broader set of data, a global set of data, is something that I think will be really important going forwards. Machine learning, augmented intelligence or artificial intelligence, and cognitive computing. For those of you not familiar with the word cognitive, cognitive means it understands, it learns, and it thinks. So it's not just going and searching for something, it's truly taking that next step. And the idea being that that supports better decision-making for the things that the human beings are actually better at. So I'm looking ahead to joined-up thinking, digital transformation, consumer-driven choice, and personalized but specialist care. So I wanted to take you on a quick journey of invention, innovation, and vision. And it's really difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. So I've put a few up that are really good fun, that show that what we can't see going into the future. And we all think that we know a lot. We might like to think we've got strategic vision. We might like to think that we have some special nuance that we can see ahead. That's why we've created whatever our technology is. So I just wanted to highlight a few of these because I think they're great fun. These are for people that are clearly world leaders and have done some amazing things in technology. And then there's some of the older ones where the telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. We are our own bubble. We create our boundaries. We say that this is where things are going to stop. And part of our challenge is actually to open our minds and think about the art of the possible instead of thinking about, well, actually, you know, we're already done. We've done that. Now let's move on. When you look back to look forward, you'll see that actually many, many years ago, people were already talking about telehealth care. They were already talking about remote care. We've got a couple of great examples of those, of people starting to think about whether this kind of technology was possible. And it's taken a long time. You know, this is nearly 100 years ago now. I put up a couple of Gartner reports, and some of the things that I find really interesting, and I use a lot of data, as we all do, to think, does it challenge my assumptions? Does it actually solidify my thoughts? And what has changed for that company? One of the things I particularly like about Gartner is they're very open when something changes from what they thought would happen to what actually did happen. And those of you familiar with the hype cycles, what happens with new technologies or any kind of innovation is you go through, there's some kind of trigger. Then there's this inflation of expectations where people think, gosh, this is it, this is what's going to change my life, save the world, and make a huge difference. Then you go into this trough of disillusionment where we're all thinking, didn't quite happen, not sure it's really going to get there. It's beset with problems, standards, too many people all paying for the same thing, the intervention of many different groups. And then you have this coming out the other side, which is typically how new markets form. You have the slope of enlightenment where you suddenly realize what its true value is, where things start to come together, where you end up with de facto standards that make it easier for us to actually reap the benefits from these particular technologies or medicines. And then you have a plateau of productivity, so you get into that truly productive stage. So Gartner's predictions back in 2012, when they did this again in 2014, actually what was interesting was they took a few things back. So some of those things that they had talked about, they realized they weren't as far forward as they thought. Now, it's kind of good news, bad news. It's meant that we stayed in some of those troughs and stayed in some of the hype for longer than we would have wanted to. And one of the things that I think is critical is that we move forward. Karen talked about the tipping point. We're here, but it's up to us to stop talking and actually start doing. And I really want you to think about how you get going. How do you as a clinician, how do you as a hospital, a trust, how do you make a difference and actually get going? And waiting for this big thing to happen, just, it's not feasible. What you're doing is trying to join the dots. You join up so you end up with systems of systems. You join up your care center data with your patient data. You join that up with what's going on with people's wearables. And you start thinking, you lay the foundations. You have to think big. You can't do this by thinking small. But what you have to do is really get going. So I think that's our challenge. Another company that was referred to earlier is Mercy. Mercy did the world's first completely patientless facility dedicated to telehealth. So no patients ever enter this. It was a $54 million investment in Minnesota, Missouri, and they have hundreds of specialized healthcare professionals. And they're providing this constant monitoring. They have nurses on call. They're using technology to sift through data and understanding, and IBM Watson's been involved in this to try and help them with what changes are being made, because what you're really looking at is layering the information. What can help me as an individual? What can help the family? What can help carers? What can help clinicians? What data can we see about that person to help them with their personalized care? What's changing for that individual? But also, what trends are we seeing? They're doing this on such a mass scale that they're able to spot trends within their environment. So what are we seeing, and why might that be happening, and how can we then intervene and make a change for the better? So I think this is, I put this up to show you that these things are really happening. And yes, it requires a lot of investment, but let's face it, there's lots of money sloshing around out there, that what we need to do is change how it's applied. So converging technological innovations is really what's making a difference. From an Internet of Things perspective, I've talked about wearables, but there's also sensors, and that can be sensors on a person, it can be sensors in the home, it can be implantables, ingestibles. There's many different types of ways that you can gather data. They can be sensors that are in buildings, they can be sensors that are in medicine. And before I was at IBM, I worked at Intel, and one of my senior colleagues had a daughter with a variety of disabilities, learning disabilities, and also some quite severe medical challenges. And one day they took her to, she was admitted to hospital, and she was given the wrong dose of medicine. Now, she was lucky, it was underdosed, there was a 0 missing off the prescription. And so what happened was she didn't get better, but there was no downside to it, it's just a length of time for getting better. Now, if that had been the other way around, and there had been an extra 0, actually it would have killed her. And being in America, in a very litigious society, as we know, but also a very forward society in terms of innovation, trial, medicine, and care, they were very quick to come and talk to the parents and say, you know, we're truly sorry, don't know how it happened, you know, hoping, of course, that they're not going to be sued. And this colleague of mine said, that's not, I don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is how do I help you not make that same mistake again? And no harm done, you know, she just was poorly for a few days longer until the data was spotted, the error was spotted. So if you think about how you can avoid that, it's fairly simple, having boundaries on something. If you have cultural challenges with whether a nurse will actually challenge the pharmacy, whether they'll challenge the doctor on that, because actually when they went back through it, the nurse did realise but didn't feel it was her place to challenge the doctors on the dosage given. And she didn't have enough information to know that that was a mistake and it was actually not going to do any good whatsoever. So you all have your own personal stories and your own personal journeys, but I think that a lot of the what we can do differently is born out of that passion and that desire to want to do something because we've been there ourselves, we've seen the challenges that we have. Analytics can really help with something like that, taking in the data, looking at cloud computing, which I was joking around with somebody earlier, you know, in the old days I remember having servers under my desk. I ran a software engineering team, and we didn't want to be bothered with the big enterprise thing, so our stuff used to get done, and we used to joke about our failover being if my server went down, it was okay because the guy next to me, we would just port everything onto his server. But cloud computing provides a lot more than that, and it provides a huge opportunity for us to pull massive data sets together and have access to software that in the past would have been prohibitively expensive and unable to manage. Beverly talked about APIs and how we use APIs to our advantage. And lots of people are putting APIs out there so that you can actually go and use them without having to create them yourselves. It doesn't matter what the platform is. What it should matter is having access to that kind of information and power. Being able to take dark, we call it dark data, but being able to take dark, unstructured data and map that with structured data to actually make sense of it, to predict, to analyze, to see the things that you didn't know, that collision of information that today you're looking at one thing and tomorrow you look at two things together. Can you use the weather to predict certain illnesses? And the answer is categorically yes. You know, we all know certain things are more prevalent when there's a change in the weather, and we will have different types of issues coming across our door as clinicians or coming into the pharmacy because of the time of year or the weather, inclement weather that we're facing. So I also put an emerging technologies hype cycle. So this is the latest one. It came out in August. And what I find fascinating is that if you look at this, it's very much skewed to the front end. It's right at the beginning of there's an innovation trigger. And what this is telling us is there's still much more to come. These things are all out there. And if you think about the top as, you know, we will go down into this trough of disillusionment, but then what we'll get is the benefit from all of these technologies behind here. And this is things like Internet of Things, natural language processing, virtual personal assistants. I'm a huge fan of chatbots. I'm probably the most frustrated person in the world when you make a phone call and you give all your information and the person says, I need to pass you on to a specialist. Doesn't matter whether that's your bank, whether it's about your car, whether it's about your health. It's about how you feel about the service that you're being given. And what happens is they pass you off, and you wait, and then they say, I've got my colleague Fred to talk to you. And Fred says, hi, how can I help you? Anyone experience that frustration? So there's some fantastic technologies out there that actually take all that data that you've already given over. Speech to text, you might have been typing that into an app, into your mobile phone. We talked about how mobile phone technology is so prevalent now with smartphones, how you can put power into people's hands to give them the healthcare that they need. So now all of a sudden that data's captured rather than someone heard it, but then realized they were out their depth and they needed to pass you to a specialist, and you then have to go through the whole scenario again. So there's some fantastic opportunities, I think, for us, and I think it's great that Gartner's saying, actually, if we take a look at this, there's so much more to come from these technologies. And again, our challenge is, how do we make that real? How do we make that really happen? We have a number of terms in the industry, M-health, connected health, e-health, and we've looked at, and we talked earlier about how do we have a national infrastructure with unique IDs and care records? How do we make sure you are who you say you are when you're phoning up? How do we make sure that the person that gets the drug is the intended person for that? Digital health and connected health, this convergence that we talk about, is about communities, it is about information, it's about health monitoring, it's about disease management, and it's about connecting devices. So if we get creative, and my challenge, there's people in this audience that have created all sorts of technologies, and a lot of people that I work with are GPs, they are doctors, they are specialists. And because of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, they realize that there's a gap. They realize that something would make a difference to help them, to help their peers, to help their patients. So how do we take that creativity and really be ambitious, for ourselves and not just for the UK, but for us as a people? How do we take that and make something from it? How do we say that we really want to be the best and we really want to have the care, the insights, the personalized care that make a difference to us? How do we give people more control over their own health, their well-being, and their aging? Just before I came up, my phone, which this one's an Apple phone, an Apple Watch, pinged to tell me it has a mindfulness app and it tells me, to breathe. Now, 6 months ago, before I had it, I wouldn't have thought during my working day about actually taking 1 minute. It's just 1 minute that it asks you for. It takes you through a little exercise, making you breathe deeply. And I think it's fantastic. It's being mindful. It's a trigger for me to help me manage my own health and well-being. So think simple. Someone else said earlier again, and Liz was talking about it, think about simplicity. Whatever you're doing in your ambitions, it's really good to have that big picture and want to be really ambitious about what we do. But how do you start that simply? How do you take something and really make that happen? So how do you take the smallest increment of that? How do you get your minimum viable product and get it out there so it starts making a difference? And from that, you'll find out what works, you'll find out what doesn't work, and you'll continue. And our health service doesn't have the luxury of failure. We have a limited budget, but what we have to do is treat it not as failure, but treat it as learning, because something in there will have worked for us. So making that simple step so that you can learn from it and you can move quickly on and iterate. And then think about really how you scale. In the Internet of Things, I was running a lab for Internet of Things, and we would bring in small companies, entrepreneurial companies that are represented here in the audience, in the demo booths, and we would bring them together with great big scaling partners, people like Accenture, people like Carillion, people like IBM, and we would say, how do we scale together? Who does what? How do you create value? And you're looking at how you create value for the consumer, for the healthcare industry, for the trusts. And then you figure out how people get paid and what does that business model look like and how's that going to work. But your primary focus has to be on taking something and making sure it can scale. Because if you can't scale, it's not a real value. And if you're keeping it to yourself, it's not a real value. Part of our proactive management of data and informed care is really thinking about prevention, early intervention, and care management. There's nothing here that the audience won't know. But our challenge is, how do we keep ourselves on the healthy, low risk, and how do we use what's available to us and make more available to us so that we truly can stay over on the left-hand side for as long as possible before moving into active disease management. And part of the challenge is this sharing that we've talked about, the multidisciplinary teams. And I think open standards as standard is a phrase that I absolutely love. Making sure that our first thought is not about closing something, it's actually that our first stance should be trust, secure, private, open. So some great examples here, because I have the privilege of working for a global company, but we have worked with southern Denmark, some of you will have been on those projects, and Catalonia as well, of looking at shared care platforms. So this is people giving access to their data and everybody both adding in as well as taking out. So there's no such thing as somebody taking out without putting in. There's no such thing as free lunch. But making the coordination of patient care much easier, depending on where you are in that care cycle. As Madeline said, carers really need to be at the forefront of our thoughts when we're going through this as well. Clinical information, who needs to know that? Actually, some people don't need to know some of that information. What they need to know is the insight behind what does that mean. And that's not the same as knowing the clinical information. So finding those insights on who needs what information and how do you share that and still retain that privacy. This particular chart I like because we all talk about the ageing population, but what does it really mean? And Barnett and Mercer, this was from an article and in fact a book, that says as we extend our lives, our complex needs increase. And the earlier that we can be in charge of our own health, the fewer of the complexities that we get as we get older. And there's a particular point in time where if you do an overlay of managed health and early prevention, you can actually significantly enhance the person's life and decrease the cost of managing as they age. So this motivated, healthy, purposeful movement, mindfulness, purposeful communication to the outside world. I mean, it doesn't matter whether this is mental health or it's physical health, but actually being aware of this. There's a great project that we're doing at the moment, which is very stereotypical for the Japanese. So we're using cognitive toys as a user interface. So, my parents are very tech savvy, particularly my father. He had an iPad before I did, which I found highly embarrassing. And he must have got cued on the first day for this thing. But the Japanese are really interesting as a people. And as a user interface, instead of a tablet, they've got a robotic dog. And this robotic dog is a companion, but it's also their monitor, it's their care monitor. It can give them information. You can do all sorts of things like tell from somebody's face, tell from somebody's voice, how they're feeling today. I am a little tired, I didn't drink that much last night, as the people that were on my table can attest to. But nevertheless, a couple of hard days, and my throat's going slightly. And what the new technologies can bring is an opportunity to help me manage my own health here. And in saying to an elderly person, you seem a little down today, which you can tell from tone analysing, you can tell from video analysing, people's facial expressions. And because it's learning all the time and it's understanding when you might be down, you can then say, would you like me to ring your daughter for you? Now, at the moment, if I talk to Siri on my phone, I have to say, could you ring my mother? Could you ring my husband? But this is about actually somebody nudging your behaviours and trying to make you make that change, because it realises something that you may have realised, you may not have done, but trying to just nudge your behaviours to do something differently. So I think it's a fantastic example of supporting and helping mental health. Many of us are hungry for information. We want more and more information, but it's no use unless you do something with it. And that health literacy that we've talked about, having access to information, that this digital era is not going away anytime soon. It's going to become more and more prevalent. We've got to connect more and more people. Even third world, we heard earlier how many people have access to smartphones, 3 times as many phones as live births, which is completely incredible. So giving people that informed choice and actually nudging their behaviours as part of that, because one of the frustrating things that friends or colleagues that I work with that are particularly in the GP sector is everyone thinks they're an expert now because they went and looked up something and it was on Google and they've definitely got this particular ailment and it's definitely this. But actually, how do you give somebody insights that it's not all about what's written down, but it's about what that truly means to you? So I think there's a lot here that we can do by sharing this information and making it truly understandable for the layperson. The quantified self is fascinating. Many companies have programs now where, you know, when you join, you get access to health information. You know, I'm a recent hire into IBM, but the first thing that happens is you get a Fitbit for your team, and then you can join a gamification, so you can go and start competing against other teams for who's walked the most, who's run the most, who's cycled the most, and it's all published on a dashboard. We do it inter-site, inter-region. I think it's fantastic, and that idea of gamifying what you do in order to change habits, because changing habits is particularly hard. My chocolate habit is not going away anytime soon. But that quantified self, so that you start understanding yourself and not just looking at the data, but truly changing based on that. And the next set of wearables and tools for that, and I don't know who's heard of these, most of you will have seen the ones on the first page, Fitbits and various different watches and phones. But there's things that now actually track and review and tell you what those mean. So Muse is a brain-sensing headband. There's also Spire, which is one that goes in your hand. And it can tell you, through a brainwave pattern, your moments of stress during the day. But the idea being that you pinpoint those and you actually can make a change. So as you begin to understand yourself more and what makes you stressed, you can actually make a change to that to lower the stress, because we all know that stress in constant is no good for us. So by understanding it, you can actually change it. So I think this is another step on and more powerful again to help us. We talked earlier about the Internet of Things, smart homes, and supporting aging in place. One of the companies that I've been working with at IBM and in our Internet of Things lab and applying IBM Watson capabilities, Cascade 3D, what they've done is very sophisticated. They started off in analytics. So they started off at the back end looking at how you, when you've got the data, what is it that you do with it? And the reality is the analytics is where the power is, where you can then make decisions, where you can see trends. And the front end of that is the sensors for how you gather that data that could be wearables. We talked earlier about them being in the home. So again, I just encourage you to think about how you make these things happen and how that can be part of whatever it is you're doing. You may be part of that ecosystem. You may have a product there. So go out and connect with people. Think about the bigger picture about how you share this. And think about what comes out of that and what you'll change and do differently because of the analytics. Liberating data, we talked about earlier. New and numerous data sources, structured data, videos. I'm fascinated by what you can find out by looking at multiple images. We've done a huge project in America, and as Bev said, you know, Brexit's obviously a very hot topic, but a lot of the innovations, Australia and America and other countries, not just, you know, how are we going to play in our new environment. But there's a lot of innovation coming from outside of that won't change about what we do today. And there's a huge program in oncology, which if you look up YouTube and IBM Watson, you can see. And it's that, how do you take massive amounts of global data and help an oncologist decide for this person that has this background, that presents like this, what's the best form of treatment? And best depends on what that person's trying to do. You're trying to extend life. Are you trying to, is it something you believe to be treatable? Does somebody want to take a risk? But it enables those conversations because you've got such a broad set of data that you can really find things that you've never been able to find before. And you wouldn't know as an oncologist that this is the treatment that was given to somebody in a very similar situation in another country, or this many people in another country, and here was the outcome, because we have to look at that on a very large scale. So capturing that data and being able to look at those insights of populations, but then actually bring it down to individual decision-making and individual care is critical. So big data is not just a matter of size. It's not just the terabytes of data that exists and there's more and more being produced all the time. It's the different forms, it's the velocity, the data in motion that we actually have, and that data uncertainty. So managing the reliability and predictability, and anybody in research that's in the room will know this is a really, really tough one. And you're constantly having to redo to see if it was an anomaly. What was different? What changed? So it's a huge opportunity to look at those characteristics of big data and try and understand what happens to them. And that can help you, we call it foundational, advanced, predictive, and prescriptive. And this is true with any kind of data. It's not just in healthcare. Natural language is also a very interesting one. And the best one I have outside of the healthcare industry is when people phone up when they have a flat tire, often the first thing they say to the person at the call center is, "I've broken down." And when it actually comes to it, they've got a flat tire. But they're right, they've stopped. Their car's stopped moving. They've broken down. And it's very similar with our health. What we describe about our health and what the symptoms are very different things. So trying to understand that data and using everything from video imaging to the language that people use to truly understand what the intent is and what actually happened. You've got to have massive sets of data to be able to do that and to actually help somebody through that journey and fairly quickly. In terms of what new services will be created, who's heard about the postal worker one? I love this one. This is a very interesting one. So this was effectively, if you take a community that doesn't have a critical mass of people, how do you deliver care? How do you make sure that people aren't lonely? How do you make sure that they've spoken to somebody today? And so Jersey Post is offering a range of health-related services, which I think is just fantastic. So they'll drop off repeat prescriptions, they'll collect them, take them for you. But they'll just make sure you're okay as they deliver your postman. Now, you may say, is that a service that's part of community? But I think this is that convergence that we talked about. It's not only convergence of technologies, but it's convergence of us as a people with those technologies and how we are human, part of what makes us human about caring for other people. Couple of slides. Another one is the Japanese Post Group. They're doing a very similar thing. So they're looking at how they deliver services and try and get rid of that digital exclusion. A lot of elderly people still don't have broadband. They don't have access to technology in the way that many of us have the privilege of doing so. And the last one of the predictions is machine learning, artificial, or we call it augmented intelligence, and cognitive computing that support the development and personalization of healthcare. This particular picture was IBM Watson, and it was looking at Jeopardy, which is an American game, and Watson actually beat the experts, which is fairly unusual. And what it was designed to do was to show that at that really big level, if you take in masses of data, it doesn't matter how expert a person is, but what you can do is take in that intelligence and learn and truly actually add to, and in this case beat, but that's not the intent when we're talking about healthcare, but what you're trying to do is augment the intelligence. So I'm going to skip through a couple of the slides. What I wanted to do was finish on the predictions that we talked about, and the conclusion being, we've got to start doing something. We have to. You're all part of this. You know, we've got this product. We're making this change. I really like the innovation agency approach of paying people to do something differently. Pay for exercise on prescription. Pay for an app, and make sure that we challenge ourselves to do things differently. It's not only about technology. It's about leadership. It's about the incentives that we provide to encourage citizens, care providers, and everybody to embrace the new ways of looking at things. And think about that individual and societal value. So part of my DNA is think really bold, collaborate. And I really think that if you think about the power that you have in this room, it's phenomenal. And start now. You know, don't wait. There's going to be no magic that happens. So really get going. Thank you.